everybody. Here on the channel just recently, I've spent a lot of time driving and talking about Aston Martins. But I appreciate they're not everybody's cup of tea. And seeing as you've clicked on this video, there's a good chance that you are a bit of a Porsche fan too. I've got just the event for you coming this July. It's in Beechwood Park, just outside of Luton, the jewel in the crown of Bedfordshire, and it's called Porsche in the Park. It is a relatively new event that's been put together by a lovely chap called Rob, who is not just a Porsche enthusiast, but a car guy through and through. This is a passion project for him, and I'm very glad to say that this year I will be attending. More than that, he has even given me a lovely discount code, so that any of you who want to come along as well and either share your lovely Porsches or simply have a nose around can get a few quid off the ticket as well. And if you have got a car to bring, anyone that uses that discount code, we're going to try and park together so we can have a nice little informal JAYEMM and Friends area. So if that sounds like something up your street, after you've watched today's video, make sure to check out the link in the description down below, and I look forward to seeing some of you there. So then, what is it you find me behind the wheel of today? Well, this is the oft-forgotten Porsche Cayman S Sport, and it is a car that its owner believes could be the sweet spot of the early 987 range. But is he right? Well, find out in today's episode of JAYEMM on Cars. It is easy to forget through the lens of 2024 what a big deal this car was when it landed, but I am now officially old enough to remember it. You see, you have to recall that back then you had, of course, the 911, the evergreen car in Porsche's lineup, and below that, the Boxster, a fabulous thing too, and a car that did upset more than a few 911 fans because from essentially this bit forwards, it was identical. However, the key difference, of course, was the fact that the Boxster came explicitly as a convertible. If you wanted your hardtop, you had to go and buy a 911, which of course was a fair bit more money. And for quite some time there had been rumours of a Boxster coupe, but nobody really wanted to confirm or deny. In fact, even in early 2005, when I was at the Porsche factory with my father doing collection of his then new 997, he asked one of the guys and said, "Are you building a Boxster coupe?" And they said, vielleicht. It turned out a few months later that they absolutely were, and I even got invited, with Dad of course, to the launch event at our local Porsche dealer. Most frustratingly, I was actually even offered a test drive of the car, which, being 16 at the time, I couldn't take them up on. Dad offered to lend me his driving license and I could tell them that this was a photo of me taken when I was much older, but I somehow thought they weren't going to buy that. In any case, a little while later, he actually then did buy a Cayman S, and by this time he had separated from my mother, so it was a car that I didn't really see all that much. It was actually rather spectacular too, in a lovely shade called olive green. And I've kept looking to see if I could find one, because if I could, I might be tempted to buy it, but apparently it's very rare indeed. He even, and this will tell you exactly the sort of person that I was as a young man, offered me a go of it. And I refused, because I suspected I probably wasn't insured, and it was raining, so I figured it was high risk, and I just didn't have the confidence to really enjoy the car, so I figured there's no reward either. And at the time, I thought that was probably my one and only chance to get a go in a Porsche on the road. I am, of course, delighted to say that I was very, very wrong on that one, and only a few years later I did, through legitimate means, get to have a go of a 987 Cayman S, and I really rather liked it. Now, there are a great many reasons why you might like the 987 Cayman, but here's a few why I love it. We'll begin with the looks. The name, and apparently the styling, was inspired by a small breed of alligator. And I can kind of see that if I squint a bit and it's quite late. However, I've always appreciated the fact that with this generation specifically, the first of the Caymans, Porsche really did put a little bit of extra effort into it. You see, for the later iterations, it always looked very much like a Boxster coupe. And of course you could argue, well, that's because that is exactly what it is. But this has its own style about it. It has an air of aggression that I really appreciate. It's still somewhat understated. It's still not in your face, in spite of the leery shade that this is wearing. We'll get onto that in a minute. And I think it has aged spectacularly well. This, to me, does not look like a car almost ready to celebrate its 20th birthday. I think Porsche did a fantastic job with this. It is also ludicrously practical, and as somebody that likes to use their cars, including their sporty ones, all year round, I've always appreciated that. Like its sibling, the Boxster, you have a pair of boots, a traditional one at the back, and a fruit. Both of which are actually a pretty decent size. In fact, because of the commonality between this and a 911, up front you've got essentially the same storage as a 911, and then out back you've got even more. For people that don't use the back seats in a 911, which I think is the majority of people, this makes it a far more practical proposition. Inside, it is then very familiar Porsche of the period, which is to say 997 for this generation, but with a few subtle differences. 3 dials rather than the 5 of the flagship car, and a few changes throughout. But by and large, it is an excellent place to spend your time. It is comfortable, the ergonomics are decent, and I would think just about anybody could get in this car, be comfortable, and take it on a long drive pretty much straight away. Naturally, being a product of the noughties, turbochargers were also nowhere to be seen, and here, for your power plant, you had a choice of 6-cylinder naturally aspirated engines. In the base model, a 2.7 litre, and in the S, which actually launched first, a 3.4, which made 295 horsepower and 251 pounds-feet of torque. That's 340 newton-meters. Combine that with a curb weight of just over 1,400 kilos in the real world, and you've got a car that'll do 0 to 62 in about 5 seconds dead and go on to a top speed of in the order of 170 miles an hour. In other words, adequate. For your gearbox, you can then either have a torque converter 5-speed automatic, or in the base Cayman a 5-speed manual, and in the S a 6-speed. All well and good, but what about the Sport? Well, this is an example of your classic run-out special. In other words, a manufacturer's attempt to keep a model that everybody knows is about to be replaced relevant by chucking a whole bunch of extras at it at a tempting price. What did you get? Well, first off, you have some GT3 RS inspired looks, including the option of this leery orange paintwork. There was also a green, and for the more introvert, some classics such as black, white and silver. You also got contrast wing mirrors, intakes on the side, and 19-inch sport design alloys that sit on 5mm spacers, helping just pad the thing out a little bit more. You also got PASM, that's Porsche's adaptive suspension management, as standard with a 10mm drop. There is also a Porsche Sports exhaust, which here currently is in a slightly unusual configuration because one of the valves is stuck, meaning it's sort of half sport, half not. I actually don't mind. I think it sounds pretty darn good. No issues with that whatsoever. The most obvious part to most people is the decals you also get on the side that are simply stickers, and so some people choose to remove or fit to cars which are not a sport. So do not assume because you've seen those that it's a sport you're buying. Personally, I think they're a little bit garish. I'm not that much of a fan, but I'm sure some people are really taken by them. Inside, you've got a few more GT3 RS inspired touches, such as this Alcantara steering wheel, Alcantara gear lever, and you also have, as standard, these hardback sport seats, which are very nice indeed. They are manual, but have plenty of adjustment, and I think they are a highlight of the car. The car was limited to just 700 examples, and to remind you how special you are, there is a little plaque over here with the number of your specific car. I like that. I don't like the modern one-of numbering. That's just, well, a bit rubbish, isn't it? And perhaps the most bizarre change of all that I really cannot fathom the logic for, Porsche felt the need to delete the binnacle for the instrument cluster. And as far as I'm aware, they've not done that on any other car, GT3 RS, Weissach packs included. It just looks a bit wrong, to be perfectly honest. You also get the obligatory Sport Chrono Pack, though to this day I'm not sure anybody has actually ever used the stopwatch. Looks nice though. And finally, the car also got the most token of remaps, taking it from 295 horsepower to 303, making it notably the first Cayman ever to crack the 300 horsepower barrier. Though you still did not get even the option of a limited slip differential, that came only later. And the persistent rumour of the day was that had Porsche given the car that, even with less power than the 911, it would have been quicker. And a few magazines actually tested these with the base Carrera of the day and found that actually it already was. Now this of course means a lot to your average pub bore, but for people like me, well, that's absolutely meaningless. What isn't though, is the way a car feels. And this is fantastic. The brilliant view out and those beautiful shapely haunches mean you can place this absolutely perfectly. The hydraulic steering isn't the quickest, but it's full of feel. If you've driven a 718 or a 981 and you think the steering is really good, well, it is really good. This is truly great. The chassis also has to be one of the most delicate and wonderfully balanced I've ever experienced. You can play with this car so much. You don't really have to take liberties with it. I'm sure you can. In fact, I know that you can, and you can have a lot of fun if you're that way inclined, but I'm not. Instead, I relish that sensation of the weight transfer from the front to back, side to side. The car is constantly talking with you. It's the most wonderful, sophisticated dialogue. It's a joy, and that engine, oh, it's full of mid-range and it sings at the top end. I know I'm in a minority here, but I've actually always had a bit of a thing for these earlier engines, the M97 as you've got here, the M96 and the 986 and 996, as opposed to the later, I think they're 9A1, the DFI engine that you got in the Gen 2 and the 997.2. This just has more character. In fact, the whole car does. It permeates the thing. It's rare that I say this, but it is basically flawless. Yes, Aston Martin V8 Vantage might have more character, a different soundtrack, more leather inside, and lots of lovely stuff to make it feel like a more special place to sit in, but the driving experience, it plays second fiddle to this. As, to be honest, does that of just about everything on the road. This is superb. Power junkies might be unimpressed with the fact that even in second gear it isn't the quickest, but you know what, for me, this amount of power, this weight, on these roads, it's just about right. Even the notoriously long Porsche gearing isn't really that much of a problem, and the fact the gearbox is so enjoyable with a nice short throw, potentially shorter than standard, but I'm not convinced by that. It all just works. And this is one of those cars where if you want to keep it, use it as a special occasions car like Sonny does, you can. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a brilliant thing. Looks good, sounds good. You can take it to the Porsche events. And people that know will go, oh, that's a Sport, isn't it? Oh, they're really cool. You could say, of course, it's nowhere near as special as the later R of the second generation, but it's also nowhere near as expensive as the R of the second generation. For those that then maybe have something even flasher for the weekend, this is a wonderful daily driver. It makes so much sense. If you only need 2 seats, this really is all the car you would ever need. Get it in a slightly more subdued hue, and it would also do a fairly good job of blending into the majority of car parks, which for a lot of people I know is a bonus too. It's brilliant, this. But there are a couple of small problems. First of which, and this is likely the reason you never heard of this car in the first place, it arrived in late 2008. In 2009, the Gen 2 came along, complete with its new engine. And though, yes, I do prefer driving this, you cannot argue the second gen engine is a lot more reliable. There are hitherto undiscovered tribes in Africa that you could offer a 986 to, and they'd say, I'm alright, thanks mate, IMS failure, nah, don't want it, take it back. And this is a shame, because you can detect things like the bore scoring they're also prone to, and most of them by now have had the IMS and RMS sorted. Because of the reputation, they also command a far smaller premium than the later cars, to the point that in some cases, if the engine did go, well, the money you've saved would nearly pay for a rebuild, and then when you sold the car, if you did all the right stuff, took it to Hartech, etc., and I would do an upgrade, you'd get a lot of your money back. But still, it puts people off. And because it arrived so late and was essentially a trim level, no one actually really reviewed it. When trying to research it, I actually actively looked for reviews of this car. They didn't exist. No magazines drove them. I'm not sure Porsche themselves actually even ever had one on the press fleet. And the other issue is that because it is a limited edition car, people like to think they're worth a little bit more money than the others. And so today, to get yourself into one of these, you'd be looking at paying around the £20,000 mark, which on the face of it is excellent value for money. It's a good price for a sensational car, but about 15 grand, maybe even less if you're willing to take a risk and a higher mileage one, will get you into effectively the 987 S not Sport, which for most people will be the same thing. Would I have one of these? I'm not really sure. I think I'd rather save the money and spend it on some mods, build the car more how I would want it. There isn't really much about this that you couldn't get elsewhere. And I like my instrument clusters with a binnacle on top. That's doing my head in. However, this does not make the 987 Cayman S Sport a bad car. Far from it. And so I think on that note, it is probably time to end. I want to say a massive thank you to Sonny for coming out today, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.